Make it official. Good morning to everybody. As I always try to do, try to remind people about the opportunities that we have to evangelize our friends and loved ones, our community, and the way we do that is various ways. But one of the ways that you can do it and be directly involved is to use the prospect card that you're aware of. I've shown it to you every week for the last several weeks. On the back of that card, there's life opportunities that happen to all of us, sometimes good, sometimes bad. If you have somebody written on that card, that's just between you and your card at this point. But if they get sick, if there's a death in the family, if there's a child that's born, anything good or bad that may happen, please pull that card out and exchange and transfer that name to a card that would go back in one of the boxes so that we that are on the evangelism team can start sending compassion cards. Mark Eisenberg does a great job, the elder in charge of that. We send out a gazillion cards a month, and it's paying dividends. So please keep that in mind. Before we start the class this morning, I've asked Brother Bob Weller, if you probably remember Bob and Sue. They moved from here about 10 years ago. We're sure glad to have them. I've asked Bob if he would lead us in opening prayer.
Our Father in heaven, we thank Thee for the opportunity to be here this morning to learn more of Your Word, especially, Father, to be with our brothers and sisters in Christ that are gathered here with us. Father, we pray that the teacher would have the lesson that would help each and every one of us, especially, Father, that we ask that You would help us to spread the word as we go through each and every day of our life. Watch over us, forgive us our sins. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
I'm not going to take a long time to do a review, but I know there are some people maybe here this week that were not here last week, and I didn't add, but I want to tell you, if you're visiting and you want to make a comment, please raise your hand and we will bring a mic to you. We have some people that have a hard time hearing, so we want to make sure everybody can hear your comment. Okay, first of all, let's talk about who the characters are. We have a man by the name of Elimelech. He was married to Naomi, and they had two children, two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And because of the famine in Bethlehem, they sojourned about 60 miles to Bethlehem. The reason they went to Moab. The reason they went to Moab is because it was a fertile area. They had a lot more springs. They had more pasture. And where they came from, there was starvation going on. There was not water available. So there was just common sense reason for Elimelech, as the father of that family, to move. Once they moved there, we realized that first Naomi's husband, Elimelech, passed away. And then her two sons also passed away, Mahlon and Chilion. But while Mahlon and Chilion were living, they married two ladies from Moab. Mahlon married Orpah, and Chilion married Ruth. We also remember last week that it looked like God had removed the famine from Bethlehem, and the word got to Naomi, and she decided it would be best for her to go back home. But her two daughter-in-laws, as you well know, were not from that area. They were not from Bethlehem. They were from Moab. So she encouraged them strongly to stay there. She felt like it would be in their best interest. She was very selfless in her suggestion because she was going back as a widow by herself from an area that she had been away from for some time. Ruth said, "No, I won't leave you. I'm going to stay with you." Orpah decided to go back, and that doesn't mean that she's a villain. She just used, in her mind, the right choice was to go back. But the promises that Ruth made to Naomi, I think, are heartwarming at least. First of all, she said, "Thy people shall be my people. Thy God shall be my God." That's really important because you got to remember that when they were in Moab, she probably was raised around unknown gods. She was raised around many, many gods. And for her to say, "Yes, I will accept your God," is saying something. And then she says, "Where you die, I will die." And then she even goes further than that. She says, "Where you're buried, I will be buried." So that's kind of where we are at this point. The last thing I think we said last week was that Ruth is all in, and she is. I've asked Mike to read for me this morning. We're going to start the book of Ruth, chapter 1. We'll finish up the chapter and we'll read verses 19 through 22. Bear in mind at this point, they are now back in Bethlehem.
So they too went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara. for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, and with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest.
If you remember, we were able to conclude last week because of the title that he wore. Elimelech probably was a pretty wealthy, pretty well-known man, which means that his wife would have been the same way. But you remember, she's been gone for several years now. By the time she returns home, most historians think that the population of Bethlehem may have only been a few hundred people due to the harsh famine. A lot of other families probably did the similar thing to what Elimelech did and left the area so that their family wouldn't die. They didn't recognize her, and I think if you think about it, sometimes you look at someone that's gone through really a lot of life difficulties, and you say, boy, they sure have aged. We probably all have said that. You know, they could say that about Naomi. Boy, she is sure aged. Those that maybe not, most people didn't recognize her, it appears, but for those that did, can you imagine the extra wrinkles that she had on her face? She lost her husband, and she lost 2 sons. She's going back to an area now where she has no vocation. She has no husband. She has no one to support her. So I can only imagine what she might feel at this point. Storms of life had not dealt kindly with her, that's for sure. And her quote is this: I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. What does she mean by that? Raise your hand if you don't mind. Everybody raise your hand if you got a comment. Thank you.
She went out with her family and goods, and she's returning basically empty-handed.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. That's the answer. I think we can add more to that, can't we? She's alone. She feels forsaken. She feels depressed. All those things that we can add to that, Brother Jim, all those things we can add to that because we understand what she's gone through had to have been really trying. Yes, sir.
The thing that impresses me there is she gave blame to the Lord, and I think we do that a lot of times.
Say that again, Jim. I apologize.
I say if you notice the wording there, she blamed God for this situation, and I think we do that a lot of times when we have difficulties. We blame it on God instead of being thankful for the blessings that we have, and we need to watch that.
That's a very, very, very valid point. We all guilty of that at times. When it seems like the rock's rolling downhill and it's getting bigger and we're running right in front of it, we all get that. Yes, ma'am.
I've been studying on my own Isaiah, and one thing that has kind of hit me was sometimes and I've been thinking about this recently, sometimes we're given adversity and God allows it. He doesn't create it, but He allows it. And sometimes it's for us to turn back to Him and acknowledge Him as a creator and a person that needs to be in our life, directing our lives. And this kind of takes place too. Maybe, God directed her path. She has this adversity, and now she's returning home, and she's returning, in a sense, to the safety of God's promised land, and she's going to be supported.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Debbie Eisenberg kind of mentioned that last week. It's the providence of God is working throughout the book. So we read in the last verse there, the time of their return was at the beginning of the barley harvest. And that appears to be possibly even God's providence that worked also. And the reason is because barley was normally harvested in mid or late April, and then wheat was harvested a month later. And so here's what I want to do. We won't get too far ahead ourselves, but the lesson I think that we've learned so far just from the first chapter. First of all, at times we might think God is against us because of a tragedy in our lives. Naomi felt empty and lost, but she still had something. What did she have? What did she have? She had him, but what else did she have? She had Ruth. She had God, obviously, of course, yes. But she had Ruth. Has she forgotten that? It's unfair for me to make a stand on this because I've never had a major tragedy happen in my life. I've never lost a spouse. I've never lost a child. So I have no idea how I might handle this. It'd be unfair for me to say, I don't believe that I would do this, or I don't know why she would do this. I don't know. I'm a human being, and I don't know how to react. Short term probably would be, in all of us, I would think, short term would be different from long term. Short term would be, I would say, they say that you go through a cycle of mourning, and everybody mourns differently. We've got to remember what we still have, even though that's tough sometimes. And I think somebody made that comment. Remember what we still have. I think Jim, what we do have instead of what we've lost. Just give me 1 second. Let me finish this. Things to ponder from chapter 1. Let me continue summarizing. I'll get to you, Miss Nancy. Relationships are not cheap bonds. We're to protect them and we're to cherish them. God put together a family for a reason. It's one of the institutions that He gave us to honor and take care of. And even though the world seems to put a damper on what family actually is, we should never do that. We might be the only hope in someone else's life, and we may not even realize it. Of course, that's what Ruth is to Naomi. I don't think anybody could argue that point. We got to choose whether to be bitter or better. Again, that's so easy to say when I've never been through it, but that's a choice that we do make. And this may be the most important one that I think about. We should respect the way people grieve over losses. Not all people grieve the same way. You see people that lose a spouse and no time at all, they're married again. They have a right to remarry. They have a scriptural marriage. But there's a little some of this, well, I can't believe they didn't wait any longer than that. We don't have a clue how different people mourn. So let's not be judgmental about that kind of thing. Miss Nancy.
When Naomi said, God has wrought bitterly toward me, she didn't realize the end of the thing. You know, God could see it from the beginning to the end. And if you read in Matthew chapter 1, the end of it, that was Jesus. But she couldn't understand that because Jesus hadn't come yet. So I think that's the way we are as people. We don't understand sometimes, but as time goes along, the older you get, the better you understand things. So I guess we should say we shouldn't feel bad toward her for the way she felt.
Absolutely.
Because she didn't know.
Yep, absolutely. She was being a human being. Exactly right. Good comment. Anybody else before we move to chapter 2? Mike, if you would, chapter 2, let's read verses 1 through 7, please.
And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was the kindred of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless thee. Then said Boaz unto his servants that were set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house.
Okay. Read Leviticus 23:22, Mike. I think you got it back there.
When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field when you reap, nor shall you gather any gleaning from your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am the Lord your God.
And then Deuteronomy 24:19.
When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterwards. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this.
So throughout the Word of God, we see God's love for those that are less fortunate, to make sure in a physical sense that they're taken care of. So although Boaz appears to be a very good man, he's not just being a nice guy. He's following what the law said that he needed to do. He takes it a step further, and we'll talk about that. But just to summarize, Boaz can be translated as mighty man of valor. That's what his name literally is translated into. Landowners, let's kind of summarize those few verses. Landowners were forbidden to reap fields out to the very borders, nor could they send their reapers into the field twice. So if I work for David and he owns the field, I can only go in and reap that field once. If they overlooked a bundle of grain, they forgot to take it out of the field, they can't go back and get it. This would be the legal background of Ruth's gleaning. Remember, however, that this was during the time of the judges when many Israelites did not adhere to the law. Greed obstructed the efforts of gleaners many times. Jeff?
Yeah, I was going to mention that not only was God looking after those people, he looked after the animals too. Remember, he said, don't muzzle the oxen, allow the oxen to, eat of the grain or whatever as well. So God was really taking care of everything like that.
Good point. Thank you. Read verse 5 again, Mike.
Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this?
What do you find interesting about this verse? Did he say, who is that? Is that what he said? He wants to know, who does she belong to? Does someone have ownership of her? Is that someone's bride? The question he doesn't ask is, who is this? He says, whose damsel is this? If you read between the lines, he's already interested. Something about her, probably her beauty, we have to assume. Something has intrigued this man. And verse 7 indicates that she did ask permission to glean. She's referred to as that Moabitist damsel. That would not be a compliment probably at that time. You got to remember how different cultures did not agree with other cultures. Many nations still fought against others. Excuse me, unfortunately, sometimes like the way our nation was back in several years ago, there was always seemed to be a respect of persons, and God has never wanted that. The hostility of Israel toward other races is indicated here. The reason that the Israelites had the right to look down on other races is only because of sin, not because of nationality or skin color. It's because of the gods they were serving and the lives that they were living. Did we miss anything between verses 1 and 7? Anybody? Verses 8 through 16, Mike.
Then said Boaz unto Ruth, hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, it hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and that how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of heaven, or Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. Then she said, Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid. though I be not like unto one of thine handmaidens. And Boaz said unto her, At mealtime come thou hither and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left. And when she was risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them, and rebuke her not.
That's a lengthy reading, so let's kind of summarize. First of all, ladies, you're in the field and you're from another country. You do not know anybody there. Would there be some amount of fear? Because the word touch that we read in verse 9, the use of the word touch could indicate another word for rape of the woman. So obviously she's there by herself. She has asked permission, but we have somebody that's over the field that's making sure that he's going to be her hero. What's the instruction in a nutshell? What's his instruction to the men that are working in that field? Leave her alone. Let her glean. And what else does he tell her not to do? Don't go anywhere else, because there's danger. I've already warned my men, they're not to harm you, they're not to touch you. But if you go into another field, that could possibly happen. The instruction also for her to drink with his workers was very unusual. That was quite a compliment that he would let her do that. Because at that time, it would have been very odd at that time. They would have been, probably what they drank out of at that time would have been clay pots or goatskin bags filled with water, drawn from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, most likely. Being allowed to drink from these would save her valuable time and allow her to stay in the field longer to glean as much as she could for she and her mother-in-law. So that's another way we see that he treated her differently, in that he let her drink from the water that was being provided actually for his workers. It was also a cultural no-no to draw water for Israelites, and for women, they would always be the ones to draw for men. So again, we see it's a little extraordinary instruction from Boaz. Now, we also find out that he knows a little bit more about her than what we knew before we read this text. What does he say he knows about her? Real loud, Jim.
He knows
Mike's right behind you, Jim. I'm sorry.
He knows that she's related to Naomi, and already knows of her attitude and care for her mother-in-law.
Okay. Here's the protections Boaz wants to give to Ruth. He said, you glean in my field and in no other field. If you work for me, you don't touch this young lady. He also told her to stay close to his own maidens and to glean following them around. Again, a little bit more protection for her. Drink water from the common places she desired. He also invited her to eat with the other harvest workers. He gave her extra food to take some to Naomi. He instructed harvesters to leave handfuls of grain intentionally for her. And he instructed the workers to not hinder or embarrass her in any way. In what way could they embarrass her? That could be, I hadn't thought about that. Could be the way she talked. Probably also her current living condition. Being widowed, not having anyone, not having a man, not having a family. And then Boaz instructed them to not rebuke her in any way. Anything we missed through verse 16, anybody? Yes, Lucas.
I think we kind of forget how much work it actually took. And I think an ephah was roughly, I think I looked it up just now, about a bushel of barley heads. You know, a barley seed's about the size of a rice. You think about how much time and work it took for her to actually go through and thresh it and harvest it to get a bushel of barley. That had to be a ton of work. I couldn't imagine doing that. You know, we use machines for all that today, but hand harvesting all of that, it's it's hard for me to fathom how much work it actually took to do a bushel of barley seed heads.
So Lucas, you're a farmer. How would they, by hand?
And I would assume that they're gathering the seed heads and they're going later, and it said in 17, she went out through and beat it. So she's actually probably throwing it in the air like they would wheat at that time to thresh out the hulls and other trash that was actually in it. And that's a guess. So some of them here may know more about the harvesting process. But I think about just the amount of work it took to get a bushel. I mean, if you think rice, that's a lot of work.
Good point. Good point. Thanks. Thanks, Lucas. Yes, Jeff?
Well, just going along with that, she's not going through a field that's ripe to be picked. She's going in after the people have already gone through the field and picked most of it. Now, I don't know how much is left, if it's 10% or 5%. I don't know how much they, dropped on the ground as they were going through. So she's scavenging through that field. She's not just going through. So that would, going along with that comment there, would make it even more work.
Right.
Right.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Jeff. Anybody else? Hold on just a second.
I think Boaz could see that she was very industrious. She didn't mind being out there. She could have been doing something else, whatever they did at the time. Maybe she baked bread or something, but she didn't. She went to the field, and he also saw her as a person who was taking care of her mother-in-law.
Yeah.
So there was several things that Boaz could see in her that you had asked that question, what did he see in her? But there were several things he could see. And she was very gentle, seemed like to be, very gentle and very industrious.
All good qualities, weren't they, Miss Nancy?
Yeah.
Good point. Anybody else? Oh, yes, John?
Miss Nancy covered about what I was going to say, but when you said earlier, normally we look at the outside of a person. We don't know what he saw in her initially, but after reading more, he looked at the inside of a person and not the outside, and God teaches us to do the same thing.
Right. Okay. Good comments. Thank y'all very much. Anybody else? Okay, let's go into verses 17 through 23. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second, Mike.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ruth is a Moabite, right?
Yes.
Ruth, okay. So I was going to say, part of that embarrassing her and things like that, she might have dressed a little differently, might have talked a little differently or something like that. And so the owner of that field or Boaz was telling his people, leave her alone. She's a foreigner. Maybe she looked a little different or whatever. So that could be part of that, where
Right.
he's just saying, leave her alone.
Right.
And I noticed in that one picture, she did have a tattoo on her arm, so that might have set her apart from the rest of the others, But anyway, I just noticed she might have had something a little different about her, the way she spoke.
Well, he was also protecting his interest in her because, one thing that I agree wholeheartedly with what John said, but what attracted him to her originally must have been her looks when he said, whose damsel is this? So he may have been wondering and making sure that those other men were out there not going to take any kind of romantic interest in her because he already had it. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my dad was a rice farmer, and if he did for some people that wanted a sample of what a rice looked like on the stems, and he'd occasionally take that off. But if you had a handful of the stems with the rice on it, and just took off the rice, you don't have very much rice. So it took her a long time to even get a bucket full, much less a bushel.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. Jeremy, and then we'll read, Mike.
Just I suppose, a personal story that goes along with this. When I was growing up, I grew up in northern Indiana, in the middle of cornfields. And many of you probably know Orville Redenbacher. Well, they planted fields close to us and across the road from us. I say road because it was not a street, it was a road. And after they would harvest, we would go in the field and bag up the popcorn, was what it was. And so we'd bag it up in gallon bags, and it took a long time to get gallon bags, and then we'd freeze it, and then we'd hand it out to friends and neighbors. And so I have when I hear the story, it makes me reflect on my childhood. I literally did that, and it did take a long time to clean up after. Of course, the deer and the animals would eat in the field as well, but we did that. And another association is one of the things that attracted me to my wife was her tenacity and certain characteristics that she was experiencing through her life at the time when I met her. And I just picture him doing this with her as well. It's just seeing her humility and that what she was striving to do, and all around a good person and selfless. And I could just picture him seeing that in her, and neat stuff. So.
Good point. Yes, sir. Over to Brother Pettis.
David, I think we also need to look at verse 16.
Read that if you would.
And it says, also let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her, leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. Well, you've also got the young men, they were harvesting also, and they were putting it into bundles. Well, he's told them that you can also let some of that that's within the bundles fall and leave that back for her. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever worked in fields with other people trying to help you keep up. But I remember as a young child picking cotton, I would have some of the older ones. We were supposed to get so much in our cotton sacks, so at the end of the day, we would weigh out to so many pounds. Well, being younger, I couldn't get as much cotton in my cotton sack as some of the older guys picking. Well, they would come along every so often and drop a few handfuls of cotton in my cotton sack so that I could keep up with everybody else. When you read this right here, these young guys have already been told by Boaz, leave a little bit from those bundles back there for her. And as you read this, it says purposely leave some. So she was getting some help there too, that Boaz said, help her out there wherever you can too. So that's being done too.
Very good. Appreciate these life stories. I think everybody else does too. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Let me get a mic to you real quick.
I can't help but notice what an honorable man Boaz was, in that he blessed her in the name of God and blessed her work and recognized that she had come to be under God's wing. So here we see a wonderful blessing from him, and she said, you have helped me because you've been generous to me.
Very good.
So we see here the beginning of who Boaz is. He's an honorable man of God.
Very good. Thank you, Miss Jackie. Anybody else? All right, verses 17 through 23, Mike.
So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she had was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen. And Ruth the Moabitess said, he said unto me also, thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest. And Naomi said unto Ruth her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his maidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz to glean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law.
Remember, the wheat harvest was about a month after the barley harvest, so she was able to spend quite a bit of time in the field with probably, I'm assuming, the same people. So they probably got to recognize her. Anybody else remember where we read about an ephah of barley? I wouldn't have either. I found this in a commentary. It's the amount that David took his three brothers when they were on the front lines. And according to what I read, it would be about 2/3 of a bushel. That's would be about a month's worth of grain and a ration usually allotted to male workers. Could feed 2 people for up to 5 to 7 days, according to what this particular writer said. Verse 20, read 20 again, Mike, would you please?
And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead.
Stop right there. What do you see here? Read it one more time, Mike, to that point. Think about we're talking about Naomi's attitude. Go ahead, Mike.
And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead.
Do you see a little bit of pessimism changing to a little bit of optimism here?
At least gratefulness.
I'm sorry?
At least gratefulness.
At least grateful and thanking God. But remember, the word that's used is kindness. I see here the beginning of maybe her mellowing out a little bit about what's happened in her life and possibly seeing some good among all the bad things that she has seen. That verse 20 really kind of hit me as being the first sign of real optimism that we see in her since she's lost all of her people. Yes, Mike?
Whenever it says left off his kindness to the dead, is she talking about herself or is she talking about her deceased?
I don't know, it says to the
husband and
living
son?
and the dead, so I don't know what she's referring to in the dead. Anybody wants to?
Makes me think she's talking about herself because she was so,
Yeah,
she just felt dead because of so much burden on her.
okay, right, yeah. It is very obvious, another thing about Boaz, he sure has taken a real liking to Ruth by his instructions that we already have seen that he gave to her. Okay, let's talk about chapter 2. We're moving right along. Things to ponder from chapter 2. Our generosity should extend to those outside our circle or social standing. For those of us as Christians, that's really not hard. This is not hard to do for any of us. The reason I say that is if you look on the board, your contribution every Lord's Day, we're blessed with people that, number one, can, and number two, want to give of their means. And a percentage of that always does go to benevolence to help those that are less fortunate. So you are helping, you are showing generosity outside your circle. And we also know that individually we have the opportunity to do the same thing. But we can do it collectively as a church. We can also do it individually. Boaz exemplified his good traits in his work every day and in his daily workplace. Boaz exemplified his good traits in his everyday life and in his daily workplace. Boaz in no way took credit for his goodness to Ruth. Rather, he pointed to her goodness toward Naomi as to why she deserved this good treatment. Any comments through chapter 2? I was hoping we would have about 5 minutes worth of comments. Ms. Liz.
While Naomi might not have known who was in the area, Boaz knew that Naomi was related to him through her husband. He knew that. And so when here's a young woman who is with Naomi, he's going to pay attention, I think.
So as far as verse 20 and kindness to the living and the dead, it's interesting that Naomi goes on to say the man is a close relative, as in a redeemer who if he had a child with Ruth, that is, would be Naomi's family, not his. So, it's talking about blessing the living and the dead. That's what she could mean by dead.
All right. Anybody else?
I'll say something.
Who?
Sound booth.
Oh, yes. And then Miss Nancy. Yes.
I was just going to say, I always find it fascinating in chapter 2 that basically we're seeing an example of God's welfare plan for the Jewish nation. In that when Jews reaped their fields, they were supposed to leave. I think we mentioned it, leave some behind. Right? They weren't supposed to go all the way out to the edges. And it's fascinating to me that his welfare plan was that the people who needed it had to go work for it. They had to do something to earn it. It wasn't just something they were entitled to because they're in a certain state.
Wow. Y'all get that one? Our whole nation could adhere to that. Nancy?
Nobody told me to say this, but I'm going to say it. We need to give kudos to the elders in this church. I remember one time right over there at the annex, there was a truck sitting there. When I brought my stuff over to put in that truck to carry wherever they were going, there was a wagon on the back, or a big old trailer on the back of that truck that was crammed full. Jesse Tenpenny couldn't even get what I brought in the back of that thing, and he put it in the back of his pickup truck. That's how much that this congregation had given to wherever that was going. And the other thing I was going to say is, and I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but there have been some bad storms in Mississippi just Friday night. It blew the entire town down, somewhere down there in the south. I don't know where it was, in Mississippi. Rolling Fork, Mississippi. It even blew their water tower down, flat on the ground. It killed 26 people. And I don't know if you heard that on the news or not.
Yes, ma'am.
But anyway, my sister was telling me that. And, I don't know if the elders here are going to help that or not. But, there's some good people in Mississippi.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm from there, so I know.
Are you saying it's better since you moved?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. It's been a long time since I've lived there, though.
I can pick it, Miss Nancy. Yeah, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes, so let me just conclude. Oh, yes, Miss Sue.
David, who are these ladies? They call him his maidens, Boaz's maidens, and his handmaidens. Who are those people?
I'm assuming people that are employed by him in the fields, but I don't know that, Miss Sue. Anybody got an answer for that? I don't know that I have an answer for that, Miss Sue. Let me mention to you something real quick. I think it's important. Sometimes the question is asked, how are the elders able to take care of issues in other areas? For the last several years, what we have normally done is we have sent checks to the congregations in that general area and have the elders there oversee the monies that are spent. I feel like that's a New Testament example. I feel like that's the way it should be done. Instead of sending it to an agency we're not really familiar where the money's ending up, we would prefer to send it directly to a group of elders. To answer your question, we have not gotten together yet. Sometimes it's smarter to wait 2 or 3 weeks and let the dust settle to see what's going on before you jump into things. And I think Brother Jesse's up there, he could agree to that. So, good comments, good class. Thank y'all very much for the conversation. We will pick up back next week, begin with chapter 3. Thank you for your comments.